My name is George Jacoby, and I live in Palm Springs, California. I was becoming aware in 1942 of what was happening in the adjacent towns where I lived. I was born in Romania, that became Hungary and so on, but it was 1942. We heard rumors that in the bigger towns and bigger cities, the Jews were being harassed, picked up, taken to forced labor, and broken their windows, and taken away property, and so on and so forth. So the rumors and happenings were going on. They started coming in, the Hungarians were there in this area where we lived, in Transylvania, and they joined effort with the German Nazis, occupiers, and they started taking away our cattle. So we had a big farm. You know, I come from a farm, small town, and they started taking away our animals, and then they started coming and loading up all the merchandise. We had a wholesale and retail store, and they started loading up the merchandise. And things went from bad to worse as it turned later on. My father was a very tough young fellow. At that time he was less than 40, 38 or 39 years old. And he was an officer in the Romanian cavalry, the only Jew that we know or heard of to become an officer. And he was a tough fellow, and when these Nazis, the Hungarians and the Germans started coming in and taking away highway robbery, it became, our property, my father stood up to them, and he actually fought with them. You know, he physically attacked them to get off our property and so on, because he didn't know their ability of what they're going to do. So they overpowered him, and they beat the living daylights out of him. They knocked out his teeth. They beat him to a pulp. And that was just the introduction of what was to come. What was to come is, they came a few nights later, and they took my father somewhere to the town burgermeister, and they started questioning him where he hid the monies and the jewelry and our worldly goods, and he should confess to it. But my father tried to tell him certain things to divert him, and they put him on the table, and they, with needles, they needled his bottom of his feet, you know, to confess. And they worked him over so bad, by the time they were through, he looked like a mess. Nobody could recognize who he was from the agony and the pain that they inflicted. So they brought him home. They let him go. He couldn't walk on his feet. It took a few weeks later, they picked us up, the whole family. My mother, my baby brother was about 9 months old at the time, and my grandfather, and they took us to a ghetto. We didn't know what it was or what and how, but it turned out to be a ghetto. They were all full of people from all over the area, you know, that they were picked up before us. And we walked into this ghetto, and the situation and the circumstances were so bad that there was no food, no sanitation, no water, and we're sitting there with small children screaming from agony of hunger and discomfort. They shoved us in a little flat, 6, 8, 10 families in a 2-bedroom little flat. So we're on top of each other. It was just unbelievable, right off the bat. The worst thing was that anybody who didn't comply with their commands, there were beatings and torturings to show the rest of them that if you don't behave, this is what's going to happen. So they beat people up to a pulp constantly. The gendarmes, the Hungarian gendarmes, they were working for the Germans. They were in the background, and they directed them what they should do, to us. But anyways, we were in the ghetto, I would say about 3 months or so. And once in a while, they used to bring in some food, some vegetables and this and that. And people attacked it like sharks. They spilled the whole thing all over the place, and people were picking it up, from the ground and trying to survive, to eat something, to give to the children. And the place was just a chaos and the most horrifying situation that you can possibly even not imagine even that there's such a thing, I managed to run away from the ghetto, to hide in a wagon that he brought in, supplies, whatever, with my cousin. I stalled away and I went back home to our town. We stole 2 horses on the way, and we rode into my town for about 2 or 3 hours it took to get there. Towards the evening, we showed up, and our house was boarded up. No food, nothing in the house. I went over, my cousin and I went over to the neighbor, who used to be our neighbor, and I said, listen, we are so hungry, we didn't eat in 3 or 4 days, nothing. Could you give us something to eat? So he says, get out of here, because we have orders. If you're going to help Jews, we're going to be shot. Get out of here fast and get lost. Don't bother me. So I said, I don't know where to go. I said, I don't care what you do, just give us something to eat. So he brought a piece of bread and a piece of ham or something, and gave it to us. And he says, now you have to leave right away, because I don't want somebody to see us, that we are there. So we went in, we hid in the vineyards, and at night we came, because it was cold, I think it was springtime, April or something, and it was so cold that we couldn't be outside, so we came at night and we hid in his barn, in the barn. Well, anyhow, in the morning when he came to feed the animals, he saw us in there. So he called the gendarmes, and he gave us out. Well, the gendarmes came, and they tied our hands with chains, and they started dragging us behind the wagon, walking for hours. They took us back to the ghetto, In the meantime, they beat the daylights out of us, From the ghetto, took a few weeks. They loaded us up in the trains, all the Jews, from the ghetto. And they took us to a godforsaken place, as it turned out, wound up in Auschwitz. In the meantime, it took 2 weeks. We were in the train. I was holding on to my grandfather for dear life. I didn't know where my father was, my mother, somewhere in the train. And my grandfather, they shoved us in like sardines. You could not move, even wipe your nose. You were standing in the train, standing up. And after 2 days, people started collapsing and falling down. My grandfather fell down on my feet, and he died. It took 2 weeks. I was seeing my grandfather, and the stench from dead people was so loud that you can smell it overseas. but nobody in the vicinity came to our aid. We're just sitting there like ducks, dead ducks in the train, with children, infants. The mothers suffocated the children because they were screaming from hunger and agony, and the mothers stifled the children to shut them up. Once they took us into the camps in Auschwitz, we became total robots. They gave orders. I didn't understand German. My father spoke some German. That if you don't comply with what we're saying to you, and they made a statement that you are right now in concentration camps. We didn't know what the hell it was. And they said, if you don't comply with our command, you'll be shot and killed on the spot. So they made an example of different areas of people who didn't comply, and they just went over and they shot them in the head to scare everybody to comply. We were in this camp in Auschwitz for about 3 or 4 weeks, and they took us to Krakow, Poland, from there. Krakow, Poland, there was a concentration camp, Krakow, and we wound up working in Schindler's factory. It was adjacent to Krakow, you know, it wasn't far, it was just a few kilometers, I suppose. And they took us every day to Schindler's factory, and we worked in the factory. It wasn't like the movie showed, I'll tell you. If anybody didn't complete his work or did any kind of damage to the work, we were making pots and pans and bullets for machine guns and all kinds of clothing. And I remember one of the guys made a mistake, and they called it a sabotage. And they threw him in a boiling 1,000-degree enamel. They threw him in alive to scare the living daylights out of us. You can imagine the fear they put into us. We worked till our fingers were bleeding. We worked around the clock because they needed the war effort, you know, to have all these goods that you were producing there. So they worked us to death, and very few people survived it. My father and I survived it, and from there, they took us to a camp in Oberschlesien in Germany. They marched us day and night, barefooted. Had no shoes on my feet, neither did others. Joe Brand, that just passed away, he was in that camp with me. And I have a friend in Los Angeles also that he's still alive. In fact, he's coming to visit. We survived from this camp. It was a small camp, about 1,500 victims. And my father was beaten to death in this camp because they accused him of sabotage. They broke every bone in his body, and I was watching it. From then on, they marched us out, and they took us to dig trenches for the German army near a town. I don't know where or what. It was in Oberschlesien. We dug trenches, and by morning, 98% of the group, the 1,500, died, froze to death. We didn't have as much clothing as I have now on. They took the few of us who were still alive, about 20, 30 of us, and they put us in a train, and as it turned out, we wound up in Buchenwald. You ever heard of Buchenwald? we arrived, must have been in December 1944, arrived in Buchenwald, and they took us off the train with forklifts because 98% of the people froze in this train. And they took us to the crematorium to be burned, dead or alive. Dead or alive made no difference. When we saw what was happening was towards the evening, my cousin and I were holding on for dear life, the two of us. Everybody else was dead. So we crawled away from the scene, and we wound up in a little shed. There was a little light shining, and we crawled and crawled, and we couldn't get up on our feet no more. We crawled to the shed, and the shed turned out to be some political prisoners, French. Leon Blum, who was the premier of France, he was in this shed. And we crawled under this floorboards from the outside, and were moaning and groaning, the two of us, because the frost on our feet were frozen black, charcoal black. We were groaning and moaning and groaning, and these people who were in the shed, they heard some noise, and they came outside, and sure enough, they saw us on the shed, you know, under the floorboards. So they started coaxing us out to come out. We'll help you, we'll come out and we'll help you. So we were scared because we thought they were going to kill us. We didn't know who they were or what they were. But anyways, we had no alternative. We crawled out, and they took us in the shed, and they right away with snow, they rubbed our feet. There were doctors in there, you know, among the prisoners, and Leon Blum was there. And they rubbed us and worked on our feet, and somehow they circulated our blood with what they were doing. And they started sharing the little meager food that they had. They started giving us a little bite of this and a little bite of bread, you know, just enough to... Anyways, we're in there about 2 months. And they were coming all the time, the Germans, you know, the patrol came to roll call, you know, to see who's where, if anybody ran away, so on and so forth. So they couldn't keep us there anymore because it was getting too dangerous. So they shoved us out, and they told us that there is a children's barrack down somewhere. So we went up there, and sure enough, there were about 600 kids in a big barrack from all over the concentration camps that they came to Buchenwald. So we walked up and we begged to let us in, to let us in because we're going to freeze to death. It was still winter. So they took us in, and as it turned out, was a Czechoslovakian professor, they called him. He was the one who coached us and coaxed us to hold on, we're going to be liberated. Liberated. We didn't know what liberation was anymore because we were less than human. We were already vegetables and zombies at this time. And we held on, and because of him, all these kids in this block, in this barrack, survived. Because of him, he coaxed us. After we were liberated, he disappeared. I don't know, he was killed or what happened to him, but he disappeared totally. We never seen him again. Never seen him again. We were liberated by the Americans in April 1945, April 11. By the time we were liberated, we were total zombies. We couldn't walk on our feet. Our feet were frozen and damaged. I weighed 32 pounds. I was 15 years old by that time. The American Red Cross women started to put in effort because people were dying every day, just dying. After we were liberated, couldn't hold out. So a few months later, they made the announcement that you're going to take us out from this camp. And as it happens, I turned out with a few 250 boys. They took us to France for recuperation. Took us to Normandy, and they took an old school and they turned it into a facility, so we have a bed to sleep in and food. And they treated us, I'll tell you, if not for the French people and the Jewish organizations from the world, the American Jews, they call them the Hayats and the all kinds of Jewish organizations that participate, and the Red Cross. Mainly America, supported this, with food and with effort, medications and stuff. We were in this home for about, 3 years, from 1945 to 1948 to recuperate. For the year and a half, at least, I couldn't walk on my feet, I couldn't put shoes on, my feet were frozen down. Even now, I have a rough time walking, even now. In fact, I'm going now to doctors because I have problems with my feet, terrible. But anyways, I came to America in 1948. And my story is as long as a telephone book, but it would take days to tell you, but I just touched upon highlights that I experienced. I tell this story because I make myself feel better by releasing all the poison that I have in my stomach from it. The next thing is I want the young people, we speak in schools, I want the young people to hear of what humanity does and could become. We want the kids to know history of what happened to humans in this world. We touch up on everything, the current events of what happened. We compare notes, with so on and so forth. And I stress to kids when I talk, they have to be at least high school to be able to provoke this kind of a talk. I tell them that unfortunately humanity, 3/4 of it, from my experience, is not civilized. And not only that not civilized, the Germans were uncivilized and degenerate to boot. They didn't kill people by shooting them in the head. They tortured them to death. They were such a sadistic bastards. See, the world was poisoned by misinterpretation of religion. The Jews were the brunt of it, that they were teaching in their religious interpretation that the Jews killed Jesus. And because of that, Hitler became a success, because everybody participated. We have to get rid of the Jews, they killed Jesus. So because of that, I feel that I must talk to people who are very lightheaded and not experienced of what happened to me and to others, and because of what the reasons are behind it. That's my explanation about your question there.